Hello Proponomics people, and welcome to my video from the 23rd of May 2024. And of course it's been a pretty big 24 hours because apart from anything else, at 5 p.m. last night Rishi Sunak took to the lectern without the presence of mind to get someone to hold an umbrella behind him or something like that, which was interesting, to announce a snap general election. Now, what I'm going to concentrate on in this video is the property implications of that, but I want to say a little bit beforehand about why that's probably happened. I also put a poll up on my LinkedIn, so if you're not already connected with me on LinkedIn, Adam Lawrence, or follow me, go and have a look at that poll. I'd love to get as many answers as I can. I'm nearing on 100 answers already, and I'd love to get 1,000. That would be brilliant. But basically my question was, why has he called the election now? Because it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. We were actually travelling back from a site yesterday, stuck on the M6 in a genuine standstill, sort of engines off and all the rest of it. Heard about the announcement, heard about the rumours, heard about the announcement, switched on chat radio, LBC, just to see what the temperature of the nation was like. And it made things time pass a little bit more quickly, apart from anything else, which was good. But the first thing that my business partner in the back of the car said was, I think he just wants to go on holiday, which made me laugh and chuckle, because I thought, do you know what, maybe it's true, because I've speculated for a long time, why on earth is Rishi Sunak doing this job? Because let's face it, he doesn't need the money, he doesn't need the power, he doesn't need the status, and worst of all, probably for the first time in his life, apart from being tall, it's something that Mr. Sunak is not good at. And I think that's probably hurt him quite a lot. You know, politically, he's been naive. He's been a bit of a weak leader. He doesn't seem to be a great manager of people. He's an absolute technocrat. I think the man's very, very smart indeed. And his policies have been pretty good. You know, could have been better, but half of that is hindsight, in honesty. Is this a strategic, politically brilliant move? Unlikely, because he's not a brilliant political strategist. Is he an election winner? Well, really, obviously he's been elected as an MP, but he stood against Liz Truss and he lost against what the Conservative Party wanted. Although I do think if the country had been asked, he was polling better in and how the country would have voted. But of course, the country don't vote; the Conservative Party members vote, and he lost to someone who ended up being, you know, a good case for the worst Prime Minister we've ever had. Certainly the most economically naive Prime Minister we've ever had, apart from anything else. So we thought 2024 was nailed on. My other choices in my poll, by the way, were, look, things have, you know, inflation's great, or at least down to 2.3. I'd definitely argue it's not great yet, but that's a much longer story, which I'll go into in other videos on the channel. Growth figures are great, top in the G7, superb. And then maybe slightly related to that, another one of my options was, things are going to go to pieces in the second half of this year, so let's get the election now. Lots of chatter about, of course, May is the time when the small boats really start to ramp up. For people who watch the figures, there have been more small boat crossings this year at this date than any other year in the past. So Rwanda not really having an impact yet. Is there time to speculate about whether a plane will take off or whatever? I can't see one taking off in the next 6 weeks. Who knows? You know, and just has he just had enough, or has he lost his marbles? Was my fourth option. So check out the poll if you've got 20 seconds to go and give me a vote. Thanks very much. So, of course, you know, polling numbers are awful. They've taken a bit of a trousering in the local elections. Probably the biggest shock, I think, and I say this as a West Midlander, and I was shocked, to be honest, because Andy Street had done a fabulous job, was Andy Street losing to Richard Parker as West Midlands mayor. Because generally speaking, I think he was quite likely to distance himself from the Conservatives. That was a bad result. But overall, those local results weren't actually as terrible. And there was lots of chat about a hung parliament. And I think the fear is really going to be, has Keir Starmer got the charisma? He certainly hasn't got the charisma of a Tony Blair. Has he got the charisma? Will it get people out of their seats to vote? I don't even know what the schedule is for the Euros yet either, and whether there's a match that day, or whether England might be in that match or anything. But we could speculate on the wisdom or the strategy behind calling it on Thursday. Therefore, I don't suppose there will be on a Thursday, because I'd expect it's probably sort of semi-final time, and it'll be earlier in the week and then the final at the weekend. But has it got anything to do with the football? Who knows? The country normally, they want that feel-good factor, don't they, that John Major used to refer to try and capture it. But of course, John Major went into the 97 election with a lot of headwind, you know, a lot of tailwind behind him. 3% economic growth, inflation under control, things moving well. But ultimately, he got blamed for 1992, Black Monday, all that had happened, Black Wednesday, sorry, coming out of the ERM, Maastricht, all the rest of it. It was a bit of a mess. and people didn't forgive him. And I don't think people will forgive Rishi Sunak, even though he wasn't presiding, certainly in number 10 office anyway, during the pandemic. Ultimately, the last significant change of government we had before that, so when Tony Blair took over from John Major, was ultimately down to us having had a significant recession and crash that we didn't get out of particularly quickly. Gordon Brown was kicked out because I think of the financial crisis mostly and all the pain that brought, and someone's got to be accountable in those situations. And the Conservatives are going to get kicked out this time because of the pandemic. And it doesn't really come down to the people in any way, shape or form. It really does boil down to, it's as simple as that. Over about the last 50 years in UK politics, we actually have preferred some stability in the governments that we've chosen. They've had 10-year terms at least. I'm assuming you count the coalition there as Conservative, because obviously they were the controlling party in the coalition. But let's see. Of course, it was still close in 2010. Could it still be close in 2024? Who knows? So yeah, we'll put the long summer holiday the long summer holiday aside. Only half joking really about that one. But let's get on to the property implications. Like I said, so there's two significant bills at the moment in the parliamentary machine. Renters reform is the one that's had 80-90% of the headlines. Lots and lots of fuss about removal of Section 21. Court system not ready to cope. That is probably the single most pertinent point. I have been unpopular over the years with my views on 21 because I don't use it when people are in significant rent arrears. I use Section 8 because that's what the law is designed for, and I think you should use the law for what it's designed for, and judges hate nothing more than using the law for something that's not designed for. So don't go to court expecting no fault and then be surprised when it's held over when you've got problematic tenants. Of course, I understand people going down the least line of resistance. Of course, sometimes we serve Section 8 and Section 21 simultaneously when it's the right thing to do, just to give us the most chances of regaining possession. But when a tenant gets a Section 8 for rent arrears, which is 95+% of the Section 8s we've ever served, then ultimately we believe it should be followed through, and it should be followed through with money claims and CCJs, because ultimately that's the flag for other landlords to say, this tenant doesn't pay their rent. And we try to operate ethically, and we try to operate as we would want others to operate with us. And I wish that more landlords operated like that. People might say it's a bit easier for us. We've got a portfolio, we've got a group, we've got some scale. That is true. Of course, the best way is to select tenants well and not have any of these problems. But if you're going to have hundreds, if not thousands of tenants, then ultimately you're going to have these problems. It becomes a percentage thing, and bad debt becomes part of the business. It's as simple as that, as it becomes the part of any business ultimately. So I'm not overly worried about Section 21 withdrawal, primarily because there is precedent for this in the UK. Scotland removed their Section 33, or amended their Section 33 of their Housing Act. Back in December 2017, it came into effect. No fixed-term tenancies is already in, and you can still recover possession, even though there's no fault anymore, if you want to move in, if you want to sell the property, if you want a family member to move into the property. There are a number of grounds for possession that still needs to be surrendered. There are longer notice periods. And look, I'm not saying Scotland are perfect, because they've done some terrible things under the recent administration over the past few years, including effectively rent controls and rent caps. And they've damaged the sector, not irreversibly, I don't suppose, in Scotland, because landlords move pretty slowly. But certainly they've put a lot of people off getting into the market. And you'll see the impact of that over the next decade. And you've seen that in the figures. The evidence for this is higher rents, higher rates of increase of rents in Scotland than anywhere else in the UK. There's no other reason for that. The wages aren't growing at a higher rate. There's no reason for that other than the rent caps and what they did. And they didn't help. They might have kicked the can down the road, but have done more damage to tenants in the long run. Immeasurable damage for a really pathetic short-term solution. But there we go. So Section 33 removal Scotland, Section 21 removal England. Yes, there's a court backup problem. Yes, we'll have to deal with that. That's unfortunate, but that's where we are. But you know what? Most of the Scottish system, I say, is pretty fair. You don't have this messing around like you do in England, where if someone's 2 months in arrears and then they pay 10 quid and they go under 2 months in arrears, then they can't be evicted because the court date's already been set and it gets re-adjourned. If you're 3 months in arrears consistently in Scotland, possession's going to be granted at the tribunal, all other things being equal. They use a tribunal system rather than the county courts or whatever. That's badly what we need in England. I don't see how hard it would be to set that up pretty quickly. It needs a budget. It needs the right people. It has people from both sides of the fence. So you may want to have someone from Shelter and someone from the NRLA on the panel. And I think that's right. I think that's the right thing to do. And they tend to be very fair when I've been involved in tribunals, but of course we're not going to tribunal when we haven't got a case to go to tribunal. Because just like any other landlord, we don't evict people for fun. We hate evicting people. We hate voids. It's the worst part of it from a business perspective, and nobody wants change. Why would you want change? If tenants happy, if landlord's happy, carry on with the relationship. It's how the relationship works. It's how that contract should work. Right? Now, I think what really scares people in this situation is not knowing whether they're going to how they're going to be able to recover possession. So if we had that clarity like we had in Scotland, and it was going to get voted through without 200 little fiddly amendments that people can't understand, can't be bothered to read, and there's no point speculating on until the bill goes through. It's taken too long to get this through. It's taken too long to talk about it. But of course, the process is slow through Parliament. And for those who don't know, it's around about a 10-step process where you've got 3 readings in the Commons, reports and committees, 3 readings in the Lords, reports and committees, and then there's ping pong between the 2 houses. This is how every single bill works, but it's taken too long. The second reading in the Lords was only 8 days ago now. It took 4 hours, 21 minutes, lots more fiddly chat, no date for committee yet. So what happens, for those who don't know, when an election is called? Well, generally speaking, Parliament is dissolved, but not immediately, not the next morning. Now, what's supposed to happen today is that this is the last day of Parliament before the Whitsun recess, and they have a week off. I'm not sure that is going to happen here. There's now what's usually called a wash-up period, where they try and desperately get legislation through that is on the statute books almost ready to be completed, so they can say they did it this Parliament. And actually, like anything in life, when there's suddenly a tight deadline, more work tends to get done, strangely enough, and the process can be at least sped up. But normally, we would have to now go through committee stage, report stage, 3rd reading, and then both houses to agree on the Renters Reform Bill. That's how many steps we've got left in the process, right? That would normally be at least 6 weeks. Yeah, it doesn't have to be like that if both sides collaborate on this. But will they collaborate, or will Labour say, do you know what, we don't really want the Conservatives to have achieved anything to help tenants? We're going to just put 200 more amendments in and effectively filibuster the bill, and it's not going to happen, and we're going to control it. Now, why would Labour do that? Well, because they don't want the Conservatives to be able to gain collateral on tenants who are unlikely to vote Tory anyway, but of course some will, potentially, for various reasons. But of course, if Labour block it, then the Conservatives can use that as political capital, saying, well, Labour are heaping more pain on tenants by not letting this bill go through. Why are they doing it? This is not congruent with what they're saying. And they're going to have to be very careful about that political football as we go into the election. But of course, don't forget, we live in the property bubble. I'm sure most people watching this video live in the property bubble. How much other stuff is there that's potentially more important? Well, and also is further in the parliamentary process. So consideration of amendments right at the last stage, we've got 1 bill, and then we've got 6 more on their 3rd reading in the Lords. So ahead, 2 steps ahead of the Renters Reform Bill, and they're about AI regulation, employment rights, genocide prevention and response, mental health professionals in schools, and victims and prisoners. Now, of course, this is the law. All of that sounds really important if you take property away for the moment. What will the ruling party currently be thinking? Which ones of these can win us some votes? Now, also, ministers are ambitious, generally speaking, and they want to get legislation through. And they don't want to waste all of this legislation that is just going to drop away if this Parliament is dissolved. It would be a real shame. And what a waste of resources, apart from anything else. But there we go. So what's the chances of RRB going through? They must be limited at this stage. I'd have to say it's a low probability from what I can see in terms of what's in front of it. And of course, there are things that are already at committee stage, because we're not gone on to report stage yet. It's not even booked for report. So it'd have to leapfrog probably 30 or 40 bits of legislation in order to get done. And wash up, generally speaking, the longest it lasts for is about 7 days. It's not a long wash up period. And we've got 6 weeks to the election. So I don't think there's going to be a big wash up. It might be that they wash up today, and perhaps they wash up Friday, and that's it. That might be all we've got left. So we'll see. I'll leave that to more experienced political commentators than me. The other bill that probably 20% of the headlines has been getting, leasehold and freehold reform. The Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act. There are actually 2. There's a Leasehold and Commonhold Reform Act as well. This is a bit further on than the RRB. This is at report stage. This is report stage, so it's had committee already, but it's still behind all of those bills that I already said. Is there any political capital left in sorting this out for leaseholders? maybe, in a way, there's more political capital that I think might influence the right sort of voters for the Conservatives, because they're more likely to be homeowners who own flats that vote Tory rather than tenants as a rule, I would say. And it is an inherently unfair system. As someone who owns some leasehold and some freehold, I feel I'm well positioned on both sides of the fence to comment. It is an inherently unfair system that is archaic and does need reform. It will be a big shame if this doesn't go through. And as I say, it's further down the pipe, and it might be quite quick because there could be much more chance for consensus. I think there's a lot less that's controversial. But again, Labour won't want Conservatives to score political points at this stage. Conservatives want to try and score political points, and that conflict of interest will cause a problem. So if I was betting man, I'd say neither of those are going to go through at this time. Unfortunately, we're not going to get them through before the election. So that's that part. What about the market implications of the announcement? I've talked a few times over the past few months about this year and how this will be the most exciting part in terms of deals. We tend to get between a 3-week and a 12-week lead-in to an election. 6 weeks is short enough for it to be called a snap election. That's why I called the video Snap Election YIKES, and the article that I published on it of the same name. And ultimately, what are we going to see here in the market? Well, markets hate uncertainty. We know that. Investors hate uncertainty. But also, people buying houses hate uncertainty. And the fear of the unknown is much, much worse than the likely outcome. Are people going to pull out of deals they've already done? Probably not. I don't think they're going to carry on. They've committed to those now. There will be a slight uplift in that, and I'll be following the figures in real time as Chris Watkin provides them, for which I'm very grateful for in his regular social media postings. I thought we'd give Chris a bit of a shout out there, because he does such a lot of hard work that's so good for the sector and for the data geeks like myself. So I don't think those sort of deals will fall apart. Will fewer people agree deals? Yes, they will. This is going to derail the train that's been going nicely. We're in a nice part of the year. The sun's been out. People have been doing deals, agreeing deals. We've had headlines over the past few weeks like best 2 weeks for sales agreed in the housing market for 2 years and things like that. It's a bad time to derail that train, because you think about it, we get to the 4th of July, we get the results on the 5th, and then we're almost in summer holidays, which go quieter anyway. So as this just extended the period, agents that are struggling because that hasn't been selling, that have just started to pick up, I think this might be a bit of a kick in the teeth. It does at least then mean September should be a pretty good and healthy market for the open market, depending on where rates are and things like that. Of course, if the gilt yields continue bouncing upwards because inflation really isn't under control, who knows? Inflation is an interesting one in this election campaign as a little aside, because I hear the government already claiming credit for getting things down from 11%, bearing in mind it was mostly their fault that we got there in the first place, down to 2.3, which was yesterday's print. But of course, they're claiming credit when really that's the Bank of England's job. And if things go back up during the election campaign, they're going to blame the Bank of England for doing that, even though they do have control over fiscal levers, which people forget impact the interest rate. But they can't talk about them because the biggest fiscal lever they have control over is the tax rate. And it's by taxing people more that it's brought inflation down to an extent. Although, of course, that's been eased recently, which is another reason why I've been saying inflation is not going to go down to 2 and it's going to go back up because of tax cuts in order to try and buy votes at the last fiscal statement back in March. But there we go. No one's really been listening to that. They've been focusing so hard on the energy prices going downwards on the basis they went up so much in the first place that they've got a bit of tunnel vision, I think, some of the forecasters. But there we go. So what does this market mean? It's going to be harder for people to sell stuff over the next 6 weeks. That's not a long time. It's not a huge deal. Probably more chances than usual to bag deals at, before or after auction. There's already been that bit of uncertainty, a wobble in the rates. There's another wobble yesterday thanks to the inflation print because it was hotter than expected. So five-year mortgage rates are not being cut again anytime in the particularly near future until we get some bad news. Will the election sponsor some bad news for the economy? I don't know, but it's going to take 4 or 5 weeks before those prints are come, because we've had the exciting prints for this month. We've had unemployment, we've had inflation, we've had growth, we've had all of those. So we'll wait another 3 weeks before that cycle comes around anyway, and then we're halfway there. But I do think you've got a chance at the moment to go and bag some nice deals, especially auction-wise, because some people will just want to get a deal agreed before the election for lots of reasons. Mostly fear of the unknown. There will be some concern about tax changes. Of course there will. Will Labour play ball with Jeremy Hunt's generous cut in capital gains tax down from 28 to 24 for the higher rate payers? Maybe. It certainly doesn't put me off buying property, and I don't think it should put you off either. We will be pressing on and redoubling our efforts, because this can often be a purple patch before an election. And we haven't had one for nearly 5 years now, so we've nearly forgotten how good it can be. A couple of things have happened in the interim since that December 19 election, so it is harder to remember stuff, it seems, than it would be if it was 4.5 years ago without a global pandemic in the mixer. So I just want to round this off to put some colour around how likely are all of these outcomes and what's going to happen in terms of the next administration. Well, I like to look at the betting markets in these situations. They're liquid, they're transparent, they tell you probabilities. There were 2 abject failures in political betting in 2016. One when Remain was given a 92% probability the night before the election, and one when Hillary Clinton was given an 80% probability the night before the 2016 presidential election. But generally speaking, markets do a pretty good job of being fairly accurate. So to win the most seats at the moment, Labour 93%, Conservatives 7%. Yes, those really are the market implied probabilities, folks. Overall majority 86% Labour, hung Parliament 12%, Conservatives 2%. And then the Conservatives, as a bonus, I've included Conservatives to lose over 200 seats from their current position, which is around about 400. There's been that many defections and by-elections and whatever, I can't even keep track anymore. But to lose over 200 seats from there is given a 63% probability. That would see them returning fewer than 200 seats at the next election, which would definitely be what's technically called a beating. Let's see what happens. But look, stranger things have happened than the Conservatives holding on or there being a hung parliament here, but it does look like political harakiri from Rishi. He didn't help himself in that reign with things can only get better in the background. I think that's a soon-to-be meme if it's not already out there. If you see it, please send it to me. But I think it might well come back to haunt him. So I hope you enjoyed this one. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, I'd really appreciate it if you gave this video a like and hit the notification bell and did subscribe. Thank you.